Ganesh Ramachandran. I'm the co-chair of BSA's Housing Committee. This event is jointly organized by Housing and Urban Design Knowledge Communities, and I would like to thank my colleagues Martin, Rami from the Urban Design Committee, and my co-chair Ray in helping bring this panel together with Jenny and Wandy from BSA. As some of you, or even most of you may be aware, Governor Baker signed the Housing Choice Bill into law in February. And Boston Globe has correctly observed that this is going to be the biggest change to Massachusetts zoning law in decades. And our discussion couldn't come at a better time. We have a terrific panel of experts and policymakers bringing together both regional as well as national perspectives at the intersection of policy, practice, and advocacy. So without further ado, I'll have Kathleen Onifer, our session moderator. She'll be introducing the speakers and take it from here. Thank you.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to start off by just encouraging you to make use of the chat. I am going to be monitoring this, and we really do want this to be a back and forth. We've got a really great set of panelists who have committed to being really forthright and honest about the challenges of zoning reform that they've encountered in their work and what they think is important for the future, and really want a chance to try and make this as much as a discussion possible in this virtual environment. I'm going to introduce our first panelist, George Prueckes, while he pulls up his slides here to share. George originally learned how to be a planner here at MIT and has spent 19 years in the public sector in the region, including in Lowell. Most recently, over the last decade, he's worked as the director of planning in Somerville, including leading the Summer Vision process to establish a master plan, and then one of the few municipalities in the country to fully rewrite their zoning ordinance and adopt that. Since 2018, he's been serving as the executive director of strategy planning and community development. So that's not only planning, but also economic development, mobility, open space, block grants, affordable housing, and housing stability programs. So he really gets all of the fun and important programs that planning touches on. And so George is going to share some perspectives on Somerville's zoning code rewrite and the importance of missing middle typologies across that effort. George. George, I think you're still muted.
Yeah, can you hear me now? I'm sitting here saying to myself I'm muted, and that really doesn't help. I'm like, oh no, I'm muted. You can hear me now, though. Okay, great. So thank you for having me here today. I'm happy to provide our perspective on missing middle housing as it relates to Somerville, which in many ways, missing middle housing almost defines Somerville. I want to provide a little bit of perspective on that and kind of put the Somerville conversation and the overall missing middle conversation in sort of a regional focus for a minute. Mayor Curtatone in Somerville and I guess up until last week, Mayor Walsh in Boston were co-chairing the Metro Mayors Coalition that includes an intercore group of communities that have been working collectively on housing issues and have some pretty interesting data to discuss about how the job growth and the demand overall in the region has created a shortage of housing. I think we all know that in what we do day to day. But the estimates have been that the Metro Mayors Coalition area needs to add 185,000 housing units until 2030 in order to meet demand and reduce or at least stabilize housing costs. And that's a really tricky thing to do. Certainly the idea of easier zoning laws to pass the housing choice steps will help. But there has to be an understanding of how that is solved at different scales and different circumstances. And so in Somerville, we're doing a lot of things like in Assembly Square, where we're building blocks of 500 units of housing at a time. But we're also focused on the world of missing middle. So this is from Dan Parolek's book on missing middle housing. I've had a chance to work over the years in the Form-Based Codes Institute organization with Opticos Design, his firm, and talk about some of these concepts that he's had about understanding those spaces between the 500 unit buildings and the single family houses. He identifies certain types, and if you actually look at what we're doing in zoning, some of the perspectives in Somerville pretty similar to that in the way that we're addressing those issues. So that's Dan Parolek's book, which I think is a really valuable perspective on missing middle housing. I want to focus particularly on how that relates to one community within that inner core. So we know growth is coming to Somerville with the opening of the Green Line at the end of 2021. 81% of Somerville will be within a half-mile walk of a rail station. In 2011, 2012, we worked on rebuilding a comprehensive plan, which we have even since updated to try to address forthcoming growth. And I think the key issue to that plan has always been this idea of areas to conserve, transform, enhance, and transform. The transform areas are fun areas to talk about, but they're not the focus of today's conversation. The real discussion in today's conversation is the conserve areas are basically our two-family house neighborhoods and three-family house neighborhoods, and the enhance areas, the squares and corridors. So we have spent in the intervening 7 years a lot of work to try to pull together a new zoning ordinance, which passed at the end of 2019. The overhaul gives us a new operating system for zoning. It doesn't necessarily solve every zoning issue we want, and it is still a work in progress. There are amendments and conversations still going on, and some of the things we're doing are experimental. One of them I'm going to address at the end here, which is clearly experimental, and we're working to address it. And Somerville, I will say, has been pretty good, even under our old code, of sort of twisting the code to get missing middle housing. I mean, these are just a couple of sites on Somerville Avenue where we built a sixplex and a three-family house. This little site over here became these two buildings where we got these two developers to work together. One, I think, is 5 units and the other is 6 with first floor retail. So we have been able to do it, but it's always been difficult to squeeze into the code. The new code was structured around the idea of enhance and address those areas, which in our code ended up the MR districts and the UR zones, the mixed use districts and the urban residents. This is our overall map, and I'll zoom into just one little area of Winter Hill, and you can see that throughout the code, it calls out neighborhood residents as our typical 2 and 3 family home district, MR as our mixed use district, urban residents is basically 4 stories. And just to give you an idea of that, here's the MR mixed use. Basically, these are mid-rise districts. That's what the MR stands for, mid-rise, at different heights. So mid-rise 3, and we have examples of the type of buildings to do in mid-rise 3, mid-rise 4, which has similar examples. And our code is kind of based on a form-based strategy. So like as a typical example, here's a mid-rise 4 district general building, which is kind of gives you all the guidance of how to build in it, a couple of examples in illustrations, just to give you an idea of what we're looking for. And then kind of a 2-page layout, which basically shows what you can do in those circumstances. And so like all form-based codes, it sort of reduces the intensity of use provisions and focuses more on building form. And I think as you get into this code, you'll see some of the challenges and things that we were discussing. I mean, I think ideally, if we had built this code in a sort of pure form-based focus to try to build housing, one might see that this top line, P is permitted and SP is special permit, that our residential household use would be by right. It is in the urban residence district, but it still triggers special permits in those mid-rise districts. Mainly for a whole bunch of reasons that came out of the discussions in our city council while we were actually going through addressing the code. So kind of the purity of some of this gets a little bit more challenging when you actually are dealing with a real world and the political trade-offs of different projects. One of the things we are very focused on Somerville, and I'll dig a little bit deeper into this in just a minute, is affordable units. In 2016, we moved to a 20% inclusionary housing affordable requirement. So all of our kind of, once you get past a certain size, it used to be 6 units, it would trigger some activity with either a payment or at 8 units, an on-site affordable unit. The new code triggers that at a smaller number, but that's a part of our whole strategy. And the other strategies we have surrounding mobility, not overbuilding parking, and green score, which is a whole process of making sure that buildings provide on-site green space in a quality way. I think in some ways, green score is a bit of a complicated metric to figure out for some people, but people are getting more used to it. It replaces old-fashioned landscape requirements that require a certain percentage of your lot to be grass. And then as projects get larger, we have sustainable development and green building standards in some of our larger districts, but they don't apply as much to the missing middle. So look at a different strategy from the mid-rise. The urban residence, I think, is one of the more interesting ones, because the urban residence, people see it sort of as a 4-story district, but what it actually does is it breaks down typical Somerville building types and how they can be built on different size lots, from the semi-detached triple-decker, which is basically a 6-unit building, which is pretty typical in a lot of our communities, where you have a typical 3-family triple-decker. You kind of stick 2 of them together. There's a very specific building type for that. There's a specific building type for row house, each of which has one of those 2-page spreads of dimensions. Apartment house, which is sort of the strategy of taking a large house that has been converted in or is used as an apartment building type, and kind of maintains the character of a house. Multiplex, which is basically a different sort of version of that. And then the apartment building, which is a little bit more of the traditional up to 4-story apartment building. And each of those has its own standards in the districts. And really, when you see where those are mapped across the city, there's a lot of interest now in building more missing middle housing and making that happen. People are finding the locations. All right, I can build a 6-plex. I do want affordable unit. We'll make a way to do this. And the projects are working. The interest is there in the urban residence district. It's by right, so there's some straightforward steps to do that, and it's working well. The neighborhood residence zone is the interesting challenge for us. It's still a substantial portion of our city, and a lot of people have this circumstance where they have it substantial, in many cases, single-family district. In our case, it's a 2-family district. And the typical detached house is a 2-unit design. It was designed and built as a 2-unit design, and in our zoning, it wrapped in our Residence A and Residence B in our old code, but Residence B in some circumstances added 3 units. So there was this whole debate as to whether or not we were downzoning this district. And it became a large conversation about whether or not it was good to downzone this district. But whether or not something was zoned RA or RB in the old code was so random, we did a huge study of it and concluded that in the 1920s, the city leaders had zoned RA in the places where they lived and RB in the places where they wanted to build more housing. Like, that seemed to be their underlying logic. So we combined them into neighborhood residence, and we were back and forth on this as a 2 or 3-unit district. And in the end of the day, what we decided was, we said there were circumstances where we wanted to have a 3rd unit. And we first talked about it sort of as an accessory unit, either an attic unit or a basement unit or an outbuilding unit in a carriage house or a small addition. And we started bringing forward those ideas to the city council. And things got very interesting at that point, because there was a lot of disagreement and back and forth and discussion and debate and honest discussion about whether or not we should do it. And what we came out with was an approval of a situation where there is a 3rd unit allowed in this district, and the 3rd unit has to be affordable. And that goes back to our affordable housing values and our affordable housing strategies. And I think there's a lot of we're doing a lot of work to try to make this work and make it work in a way that makes sense. And one of the things to note is that affordable unit is at our 3rd tier, which is 110% of area median income for a rental unit. So if I own a 2-family house in Somerville and I want to turn my attic or my basement into a 3rd unit, I can rent it at up to 110% of AMI, which makes it possible to potentially figure out and work through the demographics of that. It's very different than kind of the lower AMI stuff that we're dealing with through either purpose-built housing or our larger inclusionary units. But the challenge of inclusionary is that it does require us understanding the financial feasibility and sort of the interest in being able to do that sort of activity. If I told the average homeowner they could add a unit and they could control the destiny of it, I think it's an easier sell than the determination of whether or not it have everything that comes with an affordable unit, including income certifications and all of those steps, which we do very easily for 500-unit buildings. But doing them for a backyard cottage at someone's house is something that is experimental and interesting. We're on this discussion about whether that unit has to go through our affordable housing lottery to assign a tenant, or whether a homeowner could, identify that their grandmother wants to live in that unit and it could still qualify. It just brings up a whole bunch of policy strategies that under these circumstances, we haven't completely addressed yet. So I feel like we have this ongoing healthy conversation about inclusionary units, about affordable and accessible dwelling units as part of our whole missing middle strategy. I think we continue to be successful, and you know, in the 6, 7, 8 unit buildings, the mix of affordable and accessible and missing middle are working really well. Certainly for our nonprofits who build purpose-built housing, there's affordable housing bonuses throughout the sites that let you do more units in those buildings when you do affordable. So there's a lot of incentive there. And the question of whether or not the affordable is the 3rd unit in a 3-unit project, especially on someone's existing lot, works and how it works, is something that is still an ongoing and interesting topic of conversation that I expect will continue to test and tweak as time goes on. So that's kind of where we stand in the world of missing middle in Somerville, and I'm happy to answer questions and dig deeper into it as we go.
Great. Didn't have any questions in the chat yet, but I look forward to seeing more of those. I also I'm going to go ahead and introduce the next panelists, but feel free to put in a question and we'll pause and have George answer that now before we get to the overall end. Nat Ho is the president of Civilitude, an engineering and planning firm in Austin, Texas, as well as a founding partner of the Capital A Housing division within that effort. He lives in Austin with his wife, 2 young boys, and cats. Maybe we'll get a cat photo bomb in this panel. And in addition to practicing engineering at his firm, he's also a passionate advocate for housing in the Austin area. And so it's going to walk through some of his experience, both as a project proponent, but as an advocate in that area as well.
Thank you, Kathleen. I'm going to start talking. If you can't hear me, you're going to have to let me know. Hi, everybody. Again, my name is Nat, and I want to thank Martin for kind of connect me with this committee and allow me to come share my experience. I am from Texas, but I'm not native to Austin. Only been here 14 years, so I'm not quite a cowboy yet. Boston is quite special to me, especially for Somerville. I was actually looking at a live work unit in the Prospect Hill area, so very familiar with the zoning code. The committee mentioned that they will allow me to be honest, and here's the first honest thought. As a practicing engineer and hang out with planners all day, the pitfall is we tend to talk housing. So today I'm put on my developer hat and say, let's just do housing. All right, so here we go. So just a bit about how we set up and how we find ourselves in the development world. We are not traditional developer, right? We don't have pipelines of endless capital stacks and so on and so forth. Where we started is advocacy. We want to see housing done. We want affordable housing done. Housing policy is where a lot of us kind of connect together. We serve on commissions and so on. And then local partners with under Capital A, we bring in nonprofit group that do design, nonprofit group that make housing, wraparound services, childcare, and so on and so forth. Then we dive into the public subsidy so that we make sure that the dollar gets spent is benchmark, challenge, and do it well. And then community engagement. And then we bring the clean political capital. This is where local politics, in my opinion, is a saving grace of, like a nice break from national politics. We can still get something done and look at each other in the eye and say, let's do this. Construction Noble is a partner of ours that really address the pain of building and construction. I think housing codes is great, but you dig up the street, you hit the water pipe and things go sideways really quick. And I have all of experience about ADU costing way too much money. And then tax credit deadline. If you ever do housing that have any dollars of tax credit, IRS does not care if there's a snowstorm with COVID stack on top. The deadline of moving in is December 3rd at midnight. And then Civilitude, this is where all of it started. We bring a lot of experience in entitlement. Most engineers really shy away from the zoning and the entitlement conversation. We bring that, we talked about permitting, and then the relationship on the ground. I love these conversations because Somerville kind of remind me of Round Rock or Pflugerville to Austin. We need that regionality, otherwise things just start breaking down at the imaginary city line. So here, just a little bit to get you oriented. Again, I think Austin and Boston shares quite a bit in common in land context, and I think social sort of context as well. We sort of like the blue dot within the red state. So the beginning of all this is our office is in about the north central of town, north of the river. All right. So if you live in Austin, in Boston, you kind of know the context of that. We built our office, very small, kind of about 5,000 square feet combined. We drop in an accessory dwelling unit in the back for live work. And for a while, an attorney and his wife lived there and practiced there. So it's nice. Presently, we're doing a project outside of the urban core, and I'll talk about that in a second, why it matters to us. It's 17 townhouses up in the north part of Austin. It's a bit of a pocket of missing middle, if you will, and a lot more infill project that's spread out around town. In the very near future, we're targeting much larger development, a very different delivery model, which I'm going to talk about as well. But this is sort of a high overview to get you oriented. So same map, these dash orange is the urban core. It's basically defined as this is where most of the jobs are, job centers and so on. And as Austin grows, it's going to continue to go bigger. What's not being said here is obviously you see I-35 right here, east of Austin is heavy hotbed for gentrification. So lots of social conversation to be had outside of this context. But we hope that just by the density of our project, you can see we are committed to this pocket of town. So some other context is these crazy lines right here is there our soon to be a rail network and transit network, which I'm holding my breath as an optimist. We got $7.1 billion approved by the voters last year. So here we go. So just for the context so that y'all can compare to Boston, most of affordable housing or affordability percentage in Austin is about 10%. There's all kinds of tools that come into to make that happen, either vertical mixed use, transit oriented, smart housing. It's a very long acronym, so I can't really remember all it is, but it's basically affordable. And then micro housing, which is like tiny houses. Remember, we're in Texas, so anything smaller than 500 is considered small. In order to get to 20 to 25% affordable, baked in, you have to go through a very elaborate process called planned unit development. It would take somewhere between 3 to 10 years to execute something like this. If you're a planner, you might have heard of a project called Miller in Austin. I live in Miller, award-winning, it's fantastic. And you look at all that and it's only 25%, which is great, but it left a lot for desire. So 50% is this new tool, Affordability Unlocked. It's a shiny object, and I'm going to talk about that in a bit. But really, just another thing for context is affordable housing with a capital A starts at about 80% MFI or AMI, very similar terminology. So just to kind of draw back to what George mentioned, 80% MFI is sort of the baseline. Okay, so I can't pick another topic where everyone agree, everyone support, and somehow we don't have enough of. And affordable housing, why is it missing? And what exactly is missing? So this is an engineer's based approach to development. I'm not gonna talk too much about building form just because everybody's here is architects and urban planner, y'all know all about it. I just wanna say that townhouses and stacked condos are what we feel like the market is responding well right now. People just like to have their own places. Housing type, this is where I feel like we are first and foremost bring something that is uniquely different. Most affordable housing builders in Austin, and I imagine around the country, focus a lot more on rental. Multifamily is just a lot easier to develop for all the brain damage that go through. Ownership is just so much harder because every cell has so much legal document, deed restriction. There's so many things that comes with it. And a mixed model is even harder because now you're trying to get the multifamily and the single developer to play nice to each other. Sometimes they just like, I'm a developer that do multifamily, forget about the rest. And then the affordability percentage, like I said, 10 and 20s are the typical. We are trying to go for 50% to be the norm. And frankly, if we can hit 100% and do it well and not make it into a project, we would love to do it. And we'll talk about a project here that we develop ourselves as a proof of concept here very soon. MFI, again, we talked about 80 being the development, but we really want to do a deep cut, permanent, long-term, true affordable at 50 and sometime even at 30% MFI. This is very low. And I will look at the dollar amount here in a second, but just kind of put the Texas adjustment in there for you. Obviously, nothing in Texas is going to be quite as expensive as Boston, but you see the context here in a second. And then the unit count. This is where the engineering really kicked in. For 3 to 8 unit or even an ADU, to cut up the street, put up utility, get the permit to put in the water, the electrical, by the time you're done with it, it's just so much work and the yield is almost very little. This is why I agree with George, scaling it way down to a third unit is very difficult. I'll be the first one to admit. And we write a lot of policy trying to remove that barrier of entries. Right now, our focus is about 9 to 30 units. This is where a bit of a low-hanging fruit. We feel like we can do this well and deliver in certain pockets of town that is in dire need and really just do housing, like I said. 30 to 80 units are great. I'm hoping we can tackle those more. But right now, the other focus that we want is the other end of the spectrum where projects that already can finance and underwrite everything all by themselves is great. But if we can sprinkle in an extra 10 units affordable, or we can convince someone that, hey, wouldn't it be awesome if we can add a couple of liner condos next to your medical office building for your low wage worker, wouldn't that be great? So that's kind of the context of this. We sort of the add-on. So that takes me to the delivery model. Most developers live in the comfort spot of self-develop. You make all the decision, you come up with the financing, and you move on. We try to work with our local, especially nonprofit landholders, to be a development advisor. Recently, we actually developed with Preservation Austin, which is a nonprofit that do historic restoration. We're adding 4 units on their existing office space. That kind of thing is what we feel like goes a long way in sort of building the momentum for affordable housing, especially in that missing middle. And then we right now, like I said, in the larger project, we want to be the co-developer for the affordable component of the larger projects. Okay, so I'm sure Bill will give me an insight later on about how the process is in Boston. But let me just start with saying rezoning and land development code in Austin, it could be just as toxic as just anywhere else in the country, guaranteed. We spent the last 6-8 years volunteer and help write the code, and it's not passed. And even when it's finished writing, it's stuck in court and so on. So aside from all that, there was one policy that was recently put forth that was amazingly successful. It was introduced in February of 2019. It was adopted 3 months later. That's not an error. That's 3 months in the same year. And it was unanimously supported by the council. It never happened. Nothing else had that kind of support. And it permits by right housing use on any zonings except light industrial without no more zoning changes. So you can pick a site that is zone office, pick a site that's zone commercial, start the process, put housing on it. I mean, it took out the amazing hurdle. It waived parking except for ADA, it waived compatibility. If you do work in design, you know how hard that is. It increased by right allowable height by 25 to 50% without zoning change. Again, that's never happened before. And then it waived any density and FAR requirement. Even on a single family lot, you can put up to 6 to 8 units. I mean, these are very tall bar and it's already passed. So what our claim to fame is, we like to support housing policy and then we back it up. We help write the affordability unlocked. And then we convert one of our projects 4 months, a couple months later and say, everybody supported this. Let's see if we can show them that the market can actually make this work. So this is our project A at Lamppost, northwest side of town, I mentioned earlier. And we converted from a all market rate unit to 17 ownership unit, 100% affordable. Very proud of that. and 60 to 80% MFI. The square footage here is very comfortable for even for Texas, 1,100 to 1,400 square feet, and the sale price is at 225 to 279,000. And we can hold this price all the way into construction. Most of the deal that you see today, by the time it's finished building, people already start flipping it or increasing the pricing by 20%. The market is not very friendly to buyer right now. And some of this in here for the sort of the math head, there's 81,000 subsidy per unit or 28,000 per bedroom. This is well-crafted financial policy that I think can be discussed in a different day. But this is the key to the success. I'm dropping in here just the 2020 median income, just so that y'all know what 20%, 80% MFI look like and what 30% MFI look like. For a household of 4, the income at 30% MFI is just lower than $30,000.
Nat, this is really great, and I think we'll generate a lot of questions in the discussion.
I'm going to wrap it up here, and this one is one project I just want to show, just a photo that we'd like to do project that is 50% affordable, but 5 of those are even below the at the 30% MFI. I don't know if you look at this rendering, I don't know if you can tell. Here's another one. See if you can spot which one is the affordable component. And if you can't, that's the goal. So I leave some parting tools here for y'all to play with. We thanks to Austin folks, we now have a mapping of showing housing and transit and the affordability unlock. So that's my non-developer developer's guide to affordable housing.
Excellent. Our next panelist is Bill Beam, who is going to present on a current zoning petition that's under consideration in Cambridge. Bill's a Cambridge resident and an architect working out of a Somerville office, working primarily on residential, multifamily, and some institutional projects. And most of his clients are community development corporations, so a lot of experience designing for affordable housing, and has worked in and around the Boston area for 30 years, but also is a returned Peace Corps volunteer from Malawi. So it's a fun fact about Bill. And I want to just acknowledge there's a number of members of the A Better Cambridge steering committee that have joined the meeting today. And forewarn you all that we're going to be trying to, if you're interested, really deploy you in this ongoing effort as part of the missing middle housing petition. Great.
Okay, can you hear me and do you see my screen?
We do, although you might want to click use slideshow because we're seeing kind of everything in relatively small windows right now.
How about now?
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you, Kathleen, and thank you for BSA and everyone else who's helping to put this together. So interesting. Yes, I am Bill Beam, architect. I am a volunteer with A Better Cambridge for about the last year. I jumped in, so A Better Cambridge volunteer group, you can see they advocate for housing more affordable, and they hold great events, and they do political advocacy to promote more and better housing. Let's see if I can figure out how to advance this now. Okay. Because we have a housing crisis here. You already know that. We have it all over the country. Ours, they change a little bit from place to place, but it is extreme, and we need to do something about it, and we need to do it with some urgency. So that's why A Better Cambridge is working hard. A Better Cambridge had a great success. The city of Cambridge had a great success, which A Better Cambridge was a big part of. Passed last year, the affordable housing overlay, and it sounds a little bit like Nat's affordability unlocked program in a sense, although it took a lot longer than 3 months. Not quite 3 years, but it took forever, and it was a huge effort, and ended up passing because of a change of political leadership and a change of city councilors who A Better Cambridge was instrumental in helping to get elected. I jumped in towards the end of that initiative. But that doesn't solve Cambridge's problems. That's about affordable housing specifically. But it's clear that our zoning code is not helping things. And it's clear that Cambridge citizens want more housing and more affordable housing. So the question is, what do we do about that? And we began brainstorming and it didn't start with the idea of we need missing middle. It doesn't feel like a missing middle city really when you look at it, but in a sense it is. So that's what we'll be talking about here. I will say this is a big slide deck. I have pared it down as much as possible. I'm gonna race through it. You must go to our website and read more about it afterwards. And you also should join us and help out because we need help and we need more architects because I'm exhausted doing this work. So I'm gonna race through this. Missing middle in Cambridge is different because we have lots of missing middle. Missing middle is what makes our neighborhoods fantastic and makes them so diverse. So this is the kind of housing that is fairly called missing middle. They're small multi-family apartments. The problem is they're illegal in Cambridge, okay? Literally, you cannot build these houses. If you took these away, you could not by law build these houses back again. That's crazy because this is fantastic housing. So the question is why and what can we do about it? Well, that's not the only problem. We also have a long-standing problem of a single family zone that covers a large swath of Cambridge that is wrong for several reasons. We are requiring that we have parking on our property, which we feel like is a mistake. And so if we take on those two, and really those are the three prongs of this missing middle in my thinking, is that single family zoning is a legacy of exclusionary and racist zoning practices that we need to be done with. Requiring off-street parking, requiring that you put cars in your property is ridiculous, and we should not have that anymore. And finally, then, what do you do when you get rid of those, and what will that gain you? And that's why you need to look at the zoning and rethink that as well. So just on the social justice context, here's our single family zones in red, our 1 and 2 family zones in orange, and our multifamily in blue. And here's where people of color live in the city. You can see how that syncs. And then you see the redlining map and you see the same kind of synchronization there. Zoning districts weren't created via redlining, but they work hand in hand with them. So we need to change that. Parking minimums undermine sustainability goals. This is kind of obvious, but we need to get at that and stop filling up property with parking spaces, put housing there instead, put green space there instead. Zoning is not working towards our climate goals, our sustainability goals. It's working against it by requiring us to pave our lots. And even more so, putting our workers outside of Cambridge such that they have to commute into Boston. And that's kind of the big environmental picture here. And if you look at what we can do to curb greenhouse gas production, it's by building cities, not outsourcing to suburbs. So that's kind of the underlying thing. And finally, there's no question that multifamily housing is less expensive than compact, single family housing is more expensive. So slow down, take a breath. Okay, so now on to zoning. What does all that have to do with zoning? Well, since all of our city is beyond their dimensional limits, it means that when people go to rebuild or expand, they can't do it by right. So they have a choice. They can spend months and months and thousands of dollars with lawyers to try to push through a zoning variance or a special permit, which happens all the time. It's a big industry, not just in Cambridge, but other places. Or they can build what's as of right. And a lot of developers choose to build what's of right to go quicker and save money. So what's of right? Small little single family houses. That's what you're seeing built in sort of the missing middle lots of Cambridge. And these are examples of those. And in fact, 60%, around 60% of new permits for new construction on those lots is going for single family houses in Cambridge right now. That's not helping our housing supply. Kathleen, how am I doing time-wise?
You're doing good, but a little speed up is always welcome.
Oh my God, faster. Okay, so here's houses that are being rebuilt, small multifamilies being rebuilt as single family. Here's a good example of one where this large lot will be 4 single families and a duplex. We think, you know, this could easily be 15 units in a very reasonable multifamily. So how do we, I'm going to skip ahead here to say, so what we've done is we have said, let's get rid of these kind of gerrymandered residential districts, A through C, and make one district, kind of like more like what they have in Somerville, the N district. And let's tune it such that the dimensional standards let us build the kind of housing we already have in Cambridge and need in Cambridge to be affordable. So here's what works in the different zones now on the same size lot, singles, duplexes, small multis. Here's what we think you could do on an N lot. Here's what you can do on an AHO lot. And then looking at a more typical Cambridge lot, this is the average size lot. And this is sort of our poster child that we've been working with. Typical 2-family house, very nice. If that thing was gone, this is what you could build, literally 1 single family house, but you have to put the parking on there. And so you actually wind up with no more open space, a lot less livable space. Under our N zoning, you could do an addition for an additional unit. You could do a very compact 6-unit, or if you're a developer who likes to build single family houses, you're not forbidden to do that, but you'll leave FAR sitting on the table. You cannot develop to its maximum because of the parking requirements. Just some quick examples of the sorts of work we've been doing to test sites, to test our zoning. What makes sense for dimensional standards, and also backing out to the entire city and looking at what do the different neighborhoods look like, what is zoning produced. So I will stop there. Missing middle housing, A Better Cambridge, join us, look at our site. Thank you.
And just to be more specific, in addition to looking to the site, is that this petition is going to the planning board next week, and then on March 30th, and then we'll be moving on to the ordinance committee.
Thank you.
And so, you know, in addition to the website and the proposal there, this is a very sort of real moment where we're looking for engagement and support as that effort goes forward. Lisa, you said it, Bill, this is amazing. Thank you so much. And I want to highlight that comment because it's been invaluable as a group of advocates, many of whom include affordable housing developers, planners, and enthusiasts, to have someone with Bill's experience really working on Cambridge scaled lots and navigating the process. And so, Bill, I wonder from your perspective as sort of an architect who got really drafted into more aggressive advocacy, why you think architects are particularly important in the advocacy conversation around zoning and the skills they offer.
Sure. Well, for one thing, we get pushed around a lot, right? Architects do. Do this, do that, make it bigger, make it smaller, you know, and you know, that's what we do. So in this committee, what I found is I get pushed around a lot. Try this, try that. But the thing is, the things I'm getting pushed around a lot are things I believe in, right? So I do affordable housing, and I want to see more of it, and I want to see it in my own town. So I felt like this is a way that I could contribute to that, and I have skills that are, you know, I have to work with zoning all the time. So this is a way to kind of do that.
I'm curious how that relates to some of your experience. And, you know, you spoke about like talking about housing versus doing housing, and your experience working on the recode effort, and then also, you know, moving forward with the housing affordability unlocked.
Yeah, I would say that I got just as many bruises as Bill, working through advocacy for code in general. The land development code that Opticos actually work with, Austin Code Next, and then land development. with several years effort. I serve on commission, my partners serve on planning commission, environmental commission, all of that. And I would say, you know, keep your chin up and keep going. And like Bill said, get involved. You know, I feel like sometimes people feel that they can't fix housing all in one swoop with a land development code change, and therefore they don't do it. But I think policies and progress are important. So we have, with affordability and lock policy, right after we take a beating on the land development code, because we felt like, look, are we just gonna sit and wait? And now that we had 2 years under our belt and a couple of projects as a proof of concept, we are going back with a better version of affordability and lock 2.0. And so it's a constant process. And you know, I would say the worst thing that could happen was the Attorney General of Texas sue a couple of my partners and say, well, you guys are too involved. And I'm like, there's no such a thing. So they make us a developer. That's my opinion.
Great. I do want to flag, I will call on anyone who's got questions. I will put anything in the chat. I also, you know, I have plenty of questions to ask our panel, so please feel free to add others. George, I'm interested in this role that sort of architects play as advocates from your perspective on the public sector side, you know, whether through the code rewrite or even as projects are coming in now under the code, what it has been some of the interaction you've had with architects and designers that's been really productive.
Well, there are a couple different layers here. I mean, one is, you know, we had architects, we had Teal and Principal Group involved on our design team when we put the code together, and a lot of the drawings you see on our code come from their work with us to create the document. You know, we've had architects in the community be an active part of that. We have architects on both our planning board and zoning board of appeals who are involved in conversations about the code as we went through the process. I don't believe we have an architect on our city council though, although that certainly would be a nice addition if anyone's ever interested. That sort of perspective in our appointed boards and in our conversations is really helpful to kind of test fit things. Now, one of the things we did when we did the overhaul is a very open source process of conversation about the document. We placed the document, the PDF of the document multiple times online in a format where people could actually write comments, and then others could come in and see the comments people had written. So we had a lot of architects, ones who work for developers in the community and ones who don't and were just interested in what's going on in the code, comment through that process and sort of bounce ideas off each other and off our staff, and that helps the evolution of the document. And, you know, it took us 7 years to get that document done. Some people communities will think it's the right thing to do to sort of hunker down and try to fix something. I mean, our existing code was a masterpiece of state-of-the-art document for 1990, and it wasn't working for us because the city had changed so much and our values had adjusted over time. Other communities may find it's easier to do quick fixes and adjustments and things, you know, and regardless of whether you do or not, zoning is a document that needs evolution, and the architecture community can have a lot of conversation with that. I think one of the greatest advocacy roles architects can play is to try to have a fundamental understanding, which is an issue in New England, that the people who wrote codes in 1920, in 1950, in 1960, whenever in 1990, whenever your code may have been written, there's no rule that suggests they were smarter than us and had better ideas than us and had better solutions than us. Some communities seem to take the perception that the zoning is you know, something that cannot change or is going to have shocking impacts because of the adjustments. I remember years ago, a real estate broker saying to me in Lowell that they couldn't believe we were going to change the code because it would have an impact on property values. And I'm like, well, that's exactly what I'm trying to do. You know, if anything, I think what we're concluding now is that the people who wrote zoning in the 1920s and the 1950s were probably at a minimum more racist than us. We can probably use that assumption. But to suggest they had better ideas and therefore we should never adjust this doesn't make any sense. So having the architecture community in there going, hey, this doesn't work, whether it be a little piece of a code or an entire document, is really helpful to keeping that conversation going.
Great. All right, so George is drafting the BSA to sponsor some architects running for office throughout the region. But you also really responded to, I think, a question Jenny was raising about community responses to these efforts. So to, the idea of moving into zoning reform and putting forward policy changes. And so, Nat, I'm interested in sort of what's been, there was this quick response, this ability to move quickly on passing Affordability Unlocked. What's been the response to some of the projects that are coming out of that? The same level of unanimous support, or is the rubber hitting the road as it becomes more real?
Here's the best part. With Affordability Unlocked, none of this hit the public realm. It's all administrative. It happened with a process that are mostly involved staff who are sort of professional level, and so they do their job. They make sure that the units are there and it's livable, and it's not just a bunch of units crammed together for the sake of having a unit count. But it takes out the toxicity and where people just kind of object for the sake of objecting. Now, it's not all rosy for sure. This has not been tested in court. I'll be the first one to say that. We'll see how it roll out. But I think I just want to add sort of a nuance level at the ground, like basically on the ground, when any code change happen, is we have to be mindful of how it's perceived as well, because obviously this is preaching to the choir. Everybody here knows that we need better forms, better type, so that we can increase housing. But a perfect example of, say, an ADU policy that could really go wrong in the eyes of the public, and I just want to offer this as a sort of a different perspective, if you will. When we have ADU policy here, it say that if you want to develop, you have to pay extra money for parkland fee. You have to pay extra money to build out the sidewalk network. These are all great things. These are all things that we can all agree that it should happen. But if you are a landowner and you live in an area that historically has been underfunded for parks and sidewalk, and you are being asked to pay a large amount of dollars, not small dollars, up front to get your building permit before you even make any money with these additional units, to them it's a slap in the face of saying, oh, so you're not going to build park, you're not going to build sidewalk in front of my house, but you're going to get money from me before I can even make any money to even stay where I'm at. And I think as we write policy and as we focus on the code, having sort of a sensible and connection to the community is what's going to allow these type of unanimous support. And the council member that sponsored this particular policy is very young. He run a very grassroots campaign. He's only like 29. And so he had that network of people that kind of plugged into the intent. And so I think that's how it ended up being super popular. And I think the city of leadership is start kind of getting wiser about implementing policies so that the perception is just as intended. And so I just want to throw it out there because I don't do policy for a living. I'm just an engineer and become a developer, but I've learned along the way. And I think y'all are a bunch of smart architects. So just keep that in mind.
If I could just jump on that for one quick second, Somerville is a community that it has always said to the development world, we want you here, but we want you here consistent with our values. And our greatest focus in terms of asking for things back from developers in terms of our values is affordable housing. That's why the inclusionary numbers start so low and are at such a high percentage. The idea that they want a third unit or a fourth unit to be an inclusionary. Which, by the way, when we redid the inclusionary rules in 2016 and we lowered the threshold to 6, and I was concerned about the impact that has on missing middle housing, and I'm still concerned about the impact starting it at 3 or 4 does, and we'll analyze that and time will tell, because I'm always very conscious about the fact that throughout the region, inclusionary zoning has to create units. Inclusionary zoning can't be used as a NIMBY tool. You can't set it up to kill development finance so that you don't get affordable housing. Like that just blows up the entire concept of what we're trying to do. Our goal, hopefully, is to make sure it's working and keep testing. When it comes to infrastructure, when it comes to chasing the big dollar items, for the most part, I'm chasing the big developers for the big dollar items. I'm trying not to chase the missing middle developers for, solving the major infrastructure issues. But to relate on one more portion of the question, which I think is is really interesting about this entire situation surrounding zoning is the question about when and how advocacy gets started on doing something like changes in zoning. I produced the most boring, dry report early in my time in Somerville, 2011, 2012, called the RARB report. I think it was 2012 we issued it, which was the Residence A, Residence B district analysis. And in it were all these maps and descriptions and analysis of how the setbacks didn't work. And basically what we were doing in Residence A and Residence B was we were using the special permit as an excuse to do design review. And the way we did that is by creating nonconformity to then trigger that. Well, about 2016, I believe it was City Observer that picked it up first and wrote it, cityobservatory.org. I'll put the link in, and they wrote a little article called The Illegal City of Somerville. And they took my report and they actually put a marketing spin on it that I could never have paid enough money to create, which basically said, hey world, the entire city of Somerville is illegal under zoning. And as soon as they did that, that topic took off and it like linked with people and people were like, oh my goodness, we need to do something about this. This is ridiculous. And suddenly it created momentum for the overhaul that no work I could have done on my own could have done. And it just plucked this one simple map out of my report that basically said in the residence districts, the Residence A, Residence B, there were a total of 22 conforming lots in the entire city. That could, where the building, the lot size, the setbacks, everything else conformed with zoning. And that was it. We were off to the races after that with people saying, we got to do something about this.
Yeah.
So that's really funny to hear, George, because we have been talking within our committee about whether this whole initiative should have been called Legalize Cambridge. And people thought it was maybe a little too similar to efforts to make marijuana legal throughout the city. So we decided not to, but it's the exact same thing. The entire city of Cambridge is illegal and it's outrageous. And yet, on the other hand, do people care? They're living in their houses, not being kicked out. But we do care because we can't build the city we want. If I got another minute, I would like to get back to that question about architects' Their new code is along the lines, if not defined as a form-based zoning code. And for those who are not familiar with that term, it's trying to make zoning codes that are more about what is the forms that are produced as opposed to more abstract, complicated formulas which don't tend to work at open space. This going to the green score instead of the open.
I think we might have just lost Bill's internet and you back, Bill? You're muted now.
Do you hear me?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
I'm not hearing anybody. Sorry.
We can hear you now if you're back.
I'm gonna stop because okay, I'm back.
You're back.
Okay, sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Anyways, form-based zoning codes, I believe in theory. I hope they work out well. I hope they work for Somerville. Form-based is about building typology, and typological analysis is a very, in my mind, the most interesting form of sort of architectural theory in a way, of like looking at forms and studying them and working with them. And so typological analysis, looking at existing building stock, analyzing what it is, what are the formal characteristics of it, and what do we want to see, that sort of work to me has always been really interesting. And that's where zoning and architecture really come together. And that's what if you were looking for, what roles do architects have in here, that's another one.
Yeah, it's really understanding both, current typologies, right? To both George and Bill's points. In our region here in New England, we have such a wealth of existing middle missing housing and the struggle to make it conforming, but also future and new typologies that may be better.
And just to add one quick thing to Bill's thought, because I feel like I want to say this in a room of architects any chance I can get. The form is about typologies. It is not about architectural style. I have done everything imaginable to make sure the creativity in style from traditional to very creative modern styles are all within the realm of doable within a building typology. There's lots of space for design creativity within a form, and that's an important part of what we're doing.
Great. I think we technically have 10 more minutes on the time. I want to flag again, throw up a hand if you've got a question you want to ask verbally. I also sort of want to ask our attendees here today, whether you get to work on missing middle housing, or because of the lack of zoning reform to allow this, that's not a project type that you get to design on. I'm curious on some of your perspectives as architects. And I did see, Jenny, there's a note in the chat about saving the links and getting those posted with the recording. Nat, you had a comment that it sounds like Somerville is a rebel. And I'll throw that to George in terms of, in embarking on a major code rewrite and really thinking through these typologies, many of which sort of are really relevant regionally. What's been your role in terms of you being a resource for other planning departments and communities in our region?
Well, I do try my best to present and share our stories as best I can and be as honest about them as well. Like I'm saying, if you want to take on a multi-year project of zoning overhaul, you can do that. If it takes, if it's easier to do quick fixes, do quick fixes. But I do try my best to share these ideas as we can. Somerville is a rebel. I think that's, I like that. I think that's a fair way of describing it. I work for a mayor who in his 18th year in office still says to us every day, he wants our staff to be abnormal and try new things. And abnormal is his word to describe the way he wants us to approach policy. Like, don't accept just because something's the way it is or the way something it's always been or the way it's done everywhere else means that that's the right way to do it. And we have tried new things, and we've been able, with Mayor Curtatone and the council, we've been able to really push some very, very strategic policies across the board, between creating a displacement-oriented Office of Housing Stability to the way we've approached all sorts of things, and then in this particular case with zoning, we also have done a affordable housing overlay, which we haven't spent a lot of time talking about yet, to allow 100% affordable projects going into some of the neighborhood residence districts to be able to have more flexibility and do a little bit more density, so that they can compete on price for land with some of the folks who are doing the smaller projects. So like there's a whole, there's just, we're working to do everything we possibly can on that front. At the same time, I will say that when you spend 7 years doing an ordinance, it's always fun watching other communities around us, particularly a couple. I mean, Buffalo, New York, and Hartford, Connecticut, I could think of. We were sharing a lot of information with each of them. Hartford did theirs a lot faster than we did. Buffalo took about as much time, but we borrowed a lot of good ideas from each other over the years. Of course, Hartford has a rather unique situation where passing a citywide code required approval of their planning commission and not their elected council, which would have been which is just very different than what we're used to in Massachusetts. Hey, at least we got majority vote on new housing items in city councils and town meetings. That's progress.
A good link back to the housing choice kickoff to this. Bill, I said you've got something to say, and I know Nat also has his hand up as well. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Real quick, George, has your code been in place long enough to feel like you're starting to see benefits, downsides, or is it still too early to say?
It's a mix of everything. Yeah, I mean, it has been. It's been over a year, albeit most of that year spent in the midst of a pandemic, where we spent a couple of months with construction shut down and some challenging times to figure out how to ramp up and make that work. I think it's been around long enough that we have been back to the council on a couple of occasions with tweaks, edits, and adjustments to fix things. And we're starting to see some of the products really under construction from it. I think what remains to be seen, which is sort of outside of this call, is the larger scale big picture master plan projects that are being permitted under this code are designed to be permitted in a more logical way with negotiating benefits and stuff than what we were using in the past. And those projects are just, they have a long lead time. So we have a number of them in the pipeline. We haven't had any of them all the way through yet to see results from them. But keep an eye on the future of Boynton Yards beyond that first building, or the future of what's going on in the Brick Bottom district, to see kind of how that's all going to come together.
We have a question from
I
Sarah.
have no choice.
Go ahead. Sarah Radding was asking about passive house and deeply energy efficient design and construction entered into how some of these might think about affordability or zoning reform.
Yeah, if I don't mind jumping on that, there's a lot of cross requirement in Austin related to, if you affordable housing, you have to hit a certain amount of green building design best practice as well. So I think that's a great way to link sort of future-proof housing. But before I have to hop off, I just want to throw out my 2 cents. Again, I'm a pretend developer on this panel. So I just want to say that I'm sure a lot of you are going to step away and say, man, my client doesn't want to do affordable housing. And I'll tell you, as an engineer, I can't tell how many times I get developers that say like, yeah, we can't do that. That's too much affordable housing. I mean, even with 10, 15, 20%, you name it. And I think that's the part where I think George and Bill and a lot of folks that do advocacy and code gonna realize is the frustration is you write the best code, you have the best policy, and people don't come and build housing. And it's just like, then people say, hey, look, it doesn't work. Why are we doing all this? I would say in order for this to catch like wildfire, I think it takes a lot of education on the client side as well. And as the developer, that's why we like to go to the traditional development shop and say, look, we're not competing with you, we developer, but not really. So why don't we partner up? You build what you're gonna build anyway. We come in, give you a turnkey solution for that 10% of affordable housing that you don't care to do, but I know your investor will be happy to hear that now we have an affordable project. And I think over time, this is a kind of water that will erode the rock of standing in the way of having true affordable housing. Because if you only build 100% affordable project, it will never work because there's not enough housing. So you just have to kind of sprinkle that affordable housing in to every project that you possibly can. And frankly, there's a project that we're doing right now that the margin is laser thin. I mean, if you make one misstep, you lose money. So I throw that in there before I have to hop off. But I just thought, if you talk to a client tomorrow and they said, nah, no way, just have them call us or something. I don't know, especially if they're in Texas.
Thanks, Nat.
I'm happy to dive a little bit deeper into the passive house and energy efficiency question, because we in Somerville have been big advocates for it, and we have been tripping up on the issues of what you can and cannot use zoning to do to address those circumstances. But I do think that, big picture, when we have an affordable housing developer, when we have a developer who wants to work with us on efficiency, we have all sorts of opportunities to find, to work with a creative developer and a creative architect on great ideas. So that's a starting point. And some of our nonprofit developers are as committed to energy efficiency as they are committed to affordability. So the chance to do something interesting is always a good conversation there, and we're like progressing, I think, as we see more things in the pipeline in terms of getting beyond just the basic standards of the stretch code that exists today. But I think the bigger issue, the real breakthrough, is the climate bill at the state level, which we're hoping will put us in a position where, with a local opt-in net zero stretch code forthcoming, and I turned to our environmental folks in Somerville and I said, not to compete with anyone, but when we're in a position where that can be adopted at the local level, I want us to be first. And I don't have a worry in the world that our mayor and our council will get behind doing that. That will address a lot of those issues, because right now we sort of put all these kind of green incentives. It might get us to passive house, but it's just there's just such tricks to it, because you're basically trying to meander your way around building code issues in zoning. I mean, the key thing we did is in our big mixed use districts where you require a master plan special permit to master plan, we were able to raise the level of building energy efficiency in exchange for unlocking that master plan. And that master plan provides so much substantial value to a big developer, the biggest developers we're working with, that you really have to do it in order to get that step. But short of that, we didn't have the tool we needed until we had the net zero stretch code, which looks like we will now have after some administrative steps of implementation take place over the course of the coming months. So I'm hoping passive houses deepen our future, like there'll be lots more of it. Because
I like that George is laying down the gauntlet for all of the jurisdictions in Massachusetts here about who's going to be the first to get the net zero stretch code passed locally. And I know Jenny may include another link in terms of the BSA's ongoing advocacy for the net zero stretch code as well. Just I think we're right essentially at time to close this afternoon, but I know that all of our panelists are really passionate about this topic, and we're really happy to take any emails or follow-up questions that you have. Again, another plug that's an opportunity for some really direct advocacy in this upcoming week for the Cambridge missing middle housing proposal. So if you're someone who lives in Cambridge, works in Cambridge, or used to live in Cambridge, that's frequently the sort of market displaced Cantabrigian is a very common advocate. We really welcome your thoughts both on and support on the proposal, but also ways to make it better in light of some of these goals going forward. And with that, thanks everyone for joining us for your lunchtime, and thanks to all of our panelists for a really excellent conversation and all their ongoing work.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thanks, everyone. We will send out recording and links and presentations soon.